a connected ecosystem for the next decade. I have a very, very informed and experienced panel here. You've already got the introductions. Let me dive into the session by asking them certain questions. Uh, One request I have to the audience. I know it's a very big hall and a call coming to you will not make a difference, but if everyone can try and put their phones off the ringer and put it in a mute mode, that will really help not disturb the panelists while they're going through what they have to say. So with that, let me dive in and uh, start the questions. Also, if any of you, while the panel is going on and the speaker is talking about their questions, if any of you have a question to ask directly on the context that they are speaking about, please raise your hand. One request, please don't make the question longer than the answer to be expected, right? Keep it short, keep it precise. It'll be also great if you can just introduce yourself before asking that question. And if you want to obviously aim it to any of the panelists specifically, great. Otherwise, we can direct that. And towards the end of the session, we'll anyways keep an open audience for any questions that you would like to ask. So, Mr. Singh, firstly, thank you for that presentation. I think with all the technicals that are always around 5G, it always is a very good thing for anyone who's so technical in nature to come down to the level of the audience and just explain in very simplistic terms. But if I may just start, as a concept, 5G network transcends from imagination to reality, right? There's so many things that we can do now which we didn't expect to do earlier. What further enhancements would be required in terms of network upgrades? The role of edge networks, network slicing would play in these upgrades. If you can just elaborate a little more on that, please.
I think I tried to touch upon during my, the 3 slides presentation. Today's difficult cloud, especially the core network, is really a little bit complex in terms of understanding, and I would say it's expensive as well. So one of the things is to make the 5G successful, to roll out faster, and to ensure that we are able to deliver the performance, and to ensure that we are able to deliver the performance in cost-effective manner. We need to ensure that the cloudification is becoming more and more simpler. There is one, sort of the challenge for the operators as of now. The cloud is only best understood by today the company like AWS, Google, Microsoft, but to coming down to the operator level, we can't have all the ecosystem going to the hyperscalers, these companies. We have our own private clouds. We need to have the expertise. We need to have, good performance coming out. We need to in position to deploy cost effectively. So this is one of the challenge I see to make it the 5G rollout faster and make it useful. The second one is, as I touch upon, I think right from the device chipset to the infrastructure chipsets. I think those chipsets should be available easily. First thing, right now there's a big hue and cry in the industry. And second is they should be green in terms of reduce the power. So then we have actually lower power consumptions and make those chipsets more powerful. So I think that's the second one I would say is the thing to make the 5G more affordable at the same time to deploy faster. The third one, last one from my side, I would say that everyone, all the ecosystem has to work together to actually make the relevant 5G into everybody's life. And this is not only giving the high speed data, actually it's a platform which is going to enable a lot of services which we have not seen until now.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Jitendra, if I may just shift to you. CSPs have come a long way in terms of coverage and performance. And the modern day workloads of our digital life and businesses have tested this current network performance to the hilt. And obviously the CSPs have demonstrated immense robustness and resilience. As pandemic started, I guess it was an arduous task of trying to get a lot of the workload moved from enterprise level networks to actually home networks, right? Because that's where the workload started at work from home. How do you see the journey going forward? Because it's going to be a completely different paradigm of challenge in terms of balancing workloads, commercial feasibility, etc., etc. I could go on, but rather hear from you.
So first, thanks Shobit, and it's a pleasure to be here with my panelists. Um, so I would like to go back to the first slide that Mr. Singh showed. When you look at 5G, it fundamentally is changing a lot of the use cases. So let's take a look at that. A little louder. Let's take
Sorry, can everyone at the back hear what Dr. Jitendra is saying? Okay, excellent. You don't need to.
Okay. So when we look at network evolution over the last few decades, I think one of the things that would like to point out is that as we've been going from 2G to 3G to 4G to 5G, one of the things that we don't normally see is the backbone which this is built on, which is optical, right? So what I see is a couple of things. First, I think we are poised for a lot of exciting developments as we just talked about. There's also a significant challenge. We are not ready fully with a fiber backbone infrastructure in India. Just to give you a couple of examples, it took about 30 years for the first 1 billion fiber kilometers to be put down on the planet. The last 1 billion, we've deployed around 5 billion fiber kilometers worldwide. The last 1 billion took only a year and a half. So it's been exponentially increasing, and the reason for that is that that particular set of use cases that you just saw requires far more fiber than we have ever had in the ground in the past. And so the challenge is going to be getting fiber to the towers. We talked about making sure that we get the data from the towers to the data centers. That's going to go through fiber. So that's the challenge. And in India, if you look at it, about 30% of the towers are fiberized, give or take, in the 4G networks. We need in excess of 80% of those towers to be fiberized. But there is also the other part that with 5G networks, you're going to have 10 times the number of towers that you had in 4G networks. So the volume of fiberization is just going to go way up, and the deployment has to keep pace with that. We need to be deploying at around 3 times or 4 times the speeds that we have been deploying recently. So that's one of the big challenges.
So on the lighter side, if I don't think so, anyone should be surprised if they suddenly see fiber running through the bedroom, right?
Not through the bedroom, at least to the outside and the router will be fine. Like,
no, but that's a very important point you're bringing out, right? The densification of network is going to be an absolute must, otherwise the user experience is not going to be there. The second thing that you're saying, I thought that number was probably up from 40 to 45%, but if it's still below 40%, that's a very significant area that we really need to do. Otherwise, I don't see any network delivering any 5G, close to 5G experience, right? And that's where I'll also come to Shepherd onto you, because it's part of the ecosystem development that I would say. But just keeping with you, Dr. Jiten, how do you see that this is the situation improving? Because laying of fiber, I remember, used to be one of the biggest challenges that networks used to face. It was not only because it was intensive in investment, but also on provision of approvals, right? Municipalities were not giving permission, roads used to get dug up, there was not enough right of way to be provided. Where do you see we have actually advanced in that? Is the government doing enough? Should we be knocking on their doors to say that if so much fiber needs to be laid, how is it going to be possible? It's not the lack of will, it's not the lack of investment, but it is definitely the lack of approvals.
So when we're putting down a network, typically the cost of fiber cable and all the passive components is around 5% of the total cost of the network. The biggest chunk of that is actually in things like right of way, in the ability to get permissions, in the logistics of deployment and so on. So a couple of things that could really help is if, for one example is if that fiber could be treated like, or communications channels could be treated like utilities. I mean, you can't just go randomly dig up a power line, for example. But fiber cuts are an everyday thing, and the network operators are the ones who have to bear the brunt of it. If fibers are actually treated like utilities and there's a policy change around that, then you'll actually see a lot of benefit coming from some things like making sure that networks can constantly keep getting added to rather than actually having to worry about maintenance of the networks. That's one area. There's a number of different technologies that have come up in the recent times to make fiber deployment as less intrusive as possible. Use of manholes, horizontal drilling, all kinds of things. So it's a lot better now than it used to be 3-4 years ago, and the technology is improving every day. And I think that with 5G coming in, we're going to need all of those aspects, the policy aspects, the technology aspects, and so on to be taken, and as well as the total cost of ownership aspect, that will be important.
No, I think infra is going to obviously be the enabler. But let me move into more on the customer experience side. And this is where I'll request for Werner and Sanjeev your comments. But allow me to shift to Werner first. Werner, ecosystem is going to be extremely important, right? It's obviously, we are as weak as the weakest link in the chain, but ecosystem is going to be extremely important from a customer's point of view as well. What are your comments on that? How do you see that developing over a period of time?
Well, in two ways, right? For one, obviously you have the Make in India initiative, which makes it very, very important for India per se to build the local ecosystem, right? Obviously we have a global ecosystem. We got, partners here that represent companies that do business all over the world, but you want to have it done here. And that's where we really need to lean in and use the ecosystem connections that we already have today and help bring it to India, make sure that we manufacture locally, we bring blueprints, we bring connections that help you build this ecosystem as fast as possible. And then on the other hand, obviously use the well-established relationship that we have with the Indian players and make sure that we get this up to speed quickly. But I wanted to say to Jitendra's comment about the fiber to the tower, right? We can help with, edge compute and have a lot of compute power at the towers and at the edge, so we don't have to backhaul everything because that's a challenge. And yes, we promised that we're going to reduce power in the next generation of our silicon. So the technology will transform, will be fast. If we all think back 10 years ago when we started NFV and we had, all these challenges, what we wanted to accomplish, we all came together and we did it. So I'm very, very confident that we'll do it again, and I'm even more confident when I look at India and the energy and the initiative that's going on, everybody working together. So I think we will overcome that quickly.
That's lovely, actually. I'm sure Intel is doing a lot more than what really meets the eye, and it's that background work that's going to be important. Just let me shift to Sanjeev right now. I'll come to, because they've touched on two very important topics, Tarun, that I need to quiz you on. But Sanjeev, you look at from the ecosystem perspective and enabling the real impact through connectivity and digital transformation. What is it that you are looking at, and how do you envision what True Minds is really contributing towards?
Hi, thanks, Shobit. And I'm really honored to be part of this privileged panel. So I think I would like to address it from a different perspective as well, the ecosystem. And let me give a little, context so that, from where I am coming from. So we at True Minds are into, engineering solutions for connected and digital world. So besides working on the core technologies of 5G packet core, O-RAN, we are into developing solutions for IoT and AR, VR, and these sort of applications. So one of the aspects which I find would be very important for 5G to uptake, and especially the killer applications which Jagbir mentioned earlier. Telecom typically I've seen is sort of a closed ecosystem. The operators, the vendors, the equipment manufacturers, providers, and the implementation. What I find missing is the application developers, When we talk about, let's say, network slicing or edge computing, so ultimately I believe that, if they are open to application developers, to solution providers, who can develop applications as easily as we develop it on let's say cloud or let's say mobile applications, only then the killer applications or those stuff will be. So I find that as a, as a missing link. So as we move forward, I think the real benefit of 5G could be as the applications are as pervasive, as easily accessible. And application developers or, solution developers, they could play an important role. So I think as it's important that, these concepts are opened up so that, applications can accelerate. So that I find is a missing link and important part of the ecosystem.
Oh, no, absolutely. I think well said. I don't know whether we're still looking for the killer app, but Dil Mange More. there will always be more killer apps that are required, and that's what really contributes to the user experience, right? And that's going to be extremely important.
I just want to add, a network have been looked at as a pipe, to provide data and voice and data and 5G has done a great job in increasing the speed, the data rates, decreasing the latency. But from 5G perspective, I see that if it moves more towards as a platform, as a platform that enables the services, the applications. So that's where I think I see the ecosystem for the next decade, as the topic is.
Absolutely. The development of a platform or platforms is going to be extremely important to actually do. So
if I may add to that, that's actually something we're working on. We got 17,000 software engineers in the company, and as you know, our CEO just ran 10 years software before, so it's very important what you're saying. We're working on that to make sure that the APIs are clear and that we can really bring a uniform platform for that, so that operators can even develop what they think is in the ecosystem around, can develop on that. So software rules the world, right? So very important.
That's right. And let's imagine the world, when the mobile phone were closed, we had limited applications coming bundled with the phones. The current era wouldn't have been possible if, iPhones and, they wouldn't have opened the APIs or the app stores. So something like 5G store or something, I think.
Absolutely. I think, you have the physical stores, you have now the digital stores, and digital store on applications which are really devoted to 5G are really going to be important, and they will add to the customer experience anyways. Shifting to you, Tarun, one, innovation is going to be key in the next, in the network technology. It is expected to inherently transform industries, economies, communities, and daily life. So I would like you to just comment on where do you see and how do you see that change really happening. And secondly, Mr. Singh started on the power, and that was more or less universally talked about. I guess I would like to take it to the next step. Sustainable networks is going to be important, right? We have to, as an industry, try and be as green and as sustainable, because connections will power every sector going forward. How do you see that? So maybe I'll hold it to that, but first, the first part, which is how do you see this inherent transformation, and then coming into the sustainability aspect.
Thank you very much. I think the first part, which is linked to economy, industry, and of course the user experience, I would say that if you see in last 10 years, the way technology has transformed, maybe initially it was like just a phone call, 2G, 3G, and then the way 4G started. But now 5G is going to be a different dimension altogether. The impact on economy is going to be huge, because this is just an enabler to many, many industries. Just to take an example, there are many reports that what can be an impact on the economy from 5G is like $1.3 trillion by 2030 globally. And even if you talk about India, it might be 100 billion by 2030, but going up to 500 billion till 2040. So I think, 5G becoming an enabler to have this kind of industrial revolution overall. And it is not only one sector. If you see India, one is economy, and then we talk about what kind of industries are going to get impacted. I think for us, looking at our rural population and the kind of reach we had with 4G, and now we are thinking that how we can enhance that with 5G in the case of health industry, talk about education. Day before yesterday during inauguration, Prime Minister, and we saw that all the use cases. The main factor which came was that how to take all this to villages, education to villages, healthcare to villages, because we are still, despite the fact that we have huge growth in these sectors, but it is still a lot to be done in these sectors. So if I talk about the 5G as an enabler for industry to reach there, to reach rural, to reach education sector and the healthcare sector, I think that is going to be a huge growth in the span of next 4 to 5 years. And I think once we talk about industrial, second is how the user experience. So if I see as a farmer that if there's possibility of using technology and how 70% of the people who are working in the industry of agriculture, and today we are contributing only 18% of the total GDP. So maybe using all this technology, we can reach from 18% to 25% to 30% of GDP in agriculture, which is a huge scope for us to help the farmers. Similarly, in case of healthcare, if you talk about reaching, and education. Only 8% of the rural students could get benefit during online education when we had this pandemic situation. If we can increase it from 8% to 30% to 40%, how much impact that will make in the lives of people in the rural area where the education can be a key thing. So I would say that using this 5G as a technology, as an enabler for rural education, for healthcare in those industries and agriculture, it can actually make a huge difference from now till 2040. And I think that is what maybe the focus from government is also there. Go there and get that done. And the affordability is going to make a huge difference. And that is also one very big dimension. If you go all the countries like South Korea, Japan versus India, the way our telecom operators, with the help of course the vendor ecosystem, are able to give this service to end consumer, it is really marvelous. Never ever seen anywhere in the world. So these are the few things on this.
I second what you're saying there. I think from a commercial perspective, the kind of burden that we have put on the consumer as compared to anywhere in the world is a fraction, right? With the kind of customer or user experience that they have vis-a-vis anywhere around the world. But that also goes into the fact that there's been tremendous innovation in the way we've gone about that across the operators. I will not call out, obviously some will always blaze the field, some will follow that, but across, if they are able to do what they're able to do in the kind of money that they're charging to the customer, it's an absolutely brilliant job. But coming to, while you do the investments, while you only keeping it commercial or commercially viable, how do you maintain them or how do you make them more sustainable? Right.
Yeah, I think sustainability, and as Jagveerji mentioned during presentation, that the kind of power consumption is going to be there per site, and then multiply it by 300,000, and then by 3. It's a huge power consumption. Even if you are able to save 10%, 50%, that absolute value becomes a huge value overall. So I think Nokia, of course, has a huge focus on sustainability, coming actually straight away from the board. To the extent that if I talk about our internal plan, we want to have at least 50% reduction in power consumption for our own ecosystem of factories, offices, supply chain, warehouses as an internal target. And then coming to now the technology. There are 3 parts to it. One, I think you mentioned very clearly about the chips, that with every passing year, couple of years, there are new silicon which is coming in, which is supposed to be much more power efficient. And we know it can be 3 to 6 months here and there, but there is every time 15 to 20% power saving with every new generation. So I think that is the first thing, because that is hardware, basic hardware which is there. And then of course there are other factors which are linked to, are more likely linked to traffic situation, that if you know that in certain areas traffic is moving from morning to evening, maybe morning it is like going to office and that hub area, and evening going back to homes. So then you have to use AI ML to make sure that you are able to make it efficient use as per the traffic, as per the utilization. And that I think is going to be a key thing. And we, I think with our SON networks and with the energy saving features, we have a target to save around 20% by one saving features, and then having SON networks which can save another 10 to 15%. I think this is very important, that you use power only when you require the traffic there. Otherwise, make it in an idle mode. So these 2 things, one on the chips design, and second using AI ML to make sure that you are highly efficient and you are using when you require it, and not that the engine is on all the time. You have to make sure that it is used only when there is a traffic in that area. These are the 2 big initiatives which can actually try to save around 15 to 20% of the network energy saving at this point of time.
Thank you. You want to say something?
Yeah, it's exactly where he spoke about, the power savings that I said we come with the next generation. It's a utilization where you manage that as well. That goes back to the software and the whole operational efficiencies that we can get out of a virtualized environment that you can have. But sustainability is also a question of the supply chain overall. So we wouldn't achieve our goals that we've set ourselves on carbon neutrality, etc., if we wouldn't bring in the whole supply chain. If you think about, the factories we're building, etc., there's a huge effort there to make sure that the output then is actually going to be as sustainable as what we have to put in.
Absolutely. Generosity begins at home. First look inside and then help the outside. Mr. Singh, sorry, you were wanting to add something.
I think the action item to both of you and whole industry, we know that we are deploying the same product as what US deploy, Japan or Korea. Maybe little price for the India market from these vendors like Nokia or Ericsson or Samsung is maybe 10%, 20% lower for the infrastructure. Our ARPU is $2, 150 rupees, 160 rupees, and the US ARPU is $50. Korea is $45. Japan is $60. Okay. Europe is $40+. Now, one side the pressure is consumer wants more data, so today we are like 14 GB, 15 GB per sub per month. And when the 5G comes, it's expected to go to 40, 50 GB per month. Now, same price, expectation from the consumer, 3 times data, same technology and the capex, what we are being used by US or China or anybody else for that matter. But we have to survive in $2. So it's a big challenge. On top of that, we don't find the innovations like reducing the power consumption, innovation to reduce the overall chip cost, not only like power, but also the cost. Because finally the device and the infrastructure vendor, all they say the chipset itself is very expensive. So I think it's a whole ecosystem has to work together to ensure that we are able to monetize 5G. Otherwise, hardly there's any improvement in the ARPUs.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. So, the message to the audience, please use more, pay a little more, please try and do that. And I think, 2 things that on power, the challenge with power is that once there is production of power at that scale, you cannot store, so you have to expend it, right? So there are enough avenues to spend it. The kind of throughput that we are seeing with technology evolution is unbelievable. What the networks used to churn out 15 years back and what they churn out today is multiple X for the same consumption of power. So there is definitely a big leap forward. I won't even call it a step forward. But and what Werner said, don't only leave it to the physical infrastructure. There's so much around to be done with edge computing sector, but all this requires investment, right? And with investment, there is the commercial pressure. So I know the operators never have an easy task cut out for themselves. It's always easier for any of the suppliers, no offense, to supply the equipment, expect the money back, but finally it's on the operator to commercially exploit, make themselves viable, make themselves relevant to the customer, and yet make some decent return for the investors. So continuous compression at your end, sir. There's no 2 ways about it. Let me shift there quickly. Sanjeev, your last comment on how you see this moving forward. What will be probably the most important thing? I know you talked about killer app and killer apps, but anything further? Because, with apps, there is that continuous question of security, right? And there's been a lot more education around security. How do you see that happening?
I think, I hope you can hear me. I think security becomes an important parameter in this, and I think specs are taking care of that as well. I would say that, edge computing is another important, development while moving to 5G. And that is something that can enable very innovative applications. And access to the edge computing and getting more applications suitable for edge computing, I guess, is could be another driver for 5G.
Thank you, Dr. Jeetu.
So one way I'd put it is I'd like to focus a little bit more on the broader picture of the consumption of data. Now, the availability of the infrastructure and the consumption of data have always gone hand in hand. Every time you put down infrastructure which was ahead of data, the data caught up. And then the data pushed for the next wave of infrastructure to come in. And this kept going back and forth. And we are seeing that again. And we're going to continue doing that. And it's going to be an important question for us to answer from multiple perspectives. On the one hand, we're going to have phenomenal new applications for things we may not have even dreamed about that will come in. It's going to definitely contribute to the growth of the economy and so on and so forth. Like, for example, if we have, just pick one, AR, VR, or machine-to-machine communication, it's just a huge area. But then we also have to be mindful about the fact that we are no longer on a planet that allows us a free ride. And the questions that we've had about consumption and the cost of data and what it means. And so while we're all talking about like the advantages and the future that comes in, I think this is also something to be mindful about, that we have to do our very best to make our technologies cost effective for the consumer and for the planet.
No, very well said. Thank you, Dr. Jitu. Tarun.
I think if I see the way things are going to go next, let's say, few years, and the huge deployment which is going to happen, as we saw we heard on Saturday the targets being set up. So I would say that the local ecosystem which we discuss, that is going to be so important, that how our young entrepreneurs actually can be part of this journey along with operators, vendors. And when I saw there was 8 or 9 players in our booth who were all like in the age group of 25 to 30, and they did this as first time startup. And the way, if I compare it a couple of years back, it was very easy for them to come and discuss about these cases and say that we can do this, we can do this, we can do this. That was super impressive. And the kind of knowledge base now we have, the kind of young generation we have in India, I think somehow if the whole ecosystem can take them along and work together for having India-specific stuff, and I think Asia is known for these things. If you go to Korea, Japan, they make very localized applications, localized environment there. So I think we have to take them along and see if they can become a huge ecosystem for us for next 7 years, and they can be part of the real growth of 5G being used as an enabler and taking this system along. I think I would rather put my focus on that one.
I think that's a very nice point, Arun. I think building off the entire innovation regime, and which is really run and fueled by the startups, this also gives them the platform for a lot more that what, imaginative minds have been thinking of. So this is a very fair point, and I'll just request Werner to, what do you see? I'm sure there's a lot of innovation you're seeing at Intel, and there's a lot of startup ecosystem that you would be working with. And again, US will have their own environment. From an Indian perspective, what would you think? It may be a little different question to the topic we have at hand, but it's very important. Is there any specific issue that you see how we can and make our startup ecosystem far more mature so that we really get it to the world-class stage that we are wanting to get to?
Well, I think the easy answer is, if you look at the startup system in the US, there's so much Indian power engaged, just bring it back home, right? And you get that done pretty quickly. There's a lot of experience that you have. You don't need us to tell that because you're doing it overseas, right? So you got to bring that home and you'll be great. So that would be my first observation. From an Intel perspective, I think there's one thing that we, if I may brag a little bit, that we really do good, and that is ecosystem, right? We've done it on the data center side, we've done it on the networking side, we've done it on the IoT side. Few people know that. We work very much on use cases with partners, with startups, and we have about 55,000 deployments around the world where we enabled companies to take their technology with our technology and really bring it out and deliver customer outcomes there, right? And we're more than happy to share that. We had conversations with the operators while we're here, because one thing that I would love to see is actually that we get your ARPU up, right? That we bring use cases that people want to pay for it, because if we raise your type, ours goes up, all the boats go up, right? So there is no what would I call it, constitutional right to low ARPUs, right? If we deliver quality, people will have to eventually, hopefully, come on board and will be happy to pay more because they get more out of what we can deliver to them. I mean, there's so much innovation here. If you walk around the booth and see what you do and the other folks and what they're showing, I can see that happens. And with the plan that you have to be a developed nation in 25 years, and I think you probably do that in 20 or less years, with that hopefully the ARPUs are coming up as well.
Werner, thanks for going back to the basics, because when you said what you said about bringing it back, there were two things that came just breeze through my mind. One is what we are called ghar wapsi, come back home, right? That's one important point. And second, innovation in India, there's a particular coinage to that. It's called jugaad. And jugaad is prevalent everywhere. So if we were really to just aggregate all of that jugaad and make sure that that's relevant for consumers, I think it's going to be phenomenally important. Mr. Singh, your conclusion, I know you started the session. May I request you to now conclude the session? What are your two imperatives as an operator? I know we already made the appeal to the audience, but your two imperatives. Pay more, but like it more, pay more, but what?
I think I will have maybe relevant to the country rather than anything else. One is let's exploit the 5G. This is a platform, as I said, it's an enabler which provides the opportunity to all the small companies, startups, ITs, and like any other person who can contribute towards the experience of consumer or the enterprise, enable them to make their life easier in terms of whatever they do. So this is the opportunity where operators are very hungry, looking forward to have such use cases where we can actually offer to our customers. And in this process, everybody wins. Customer gets what the customer wants, operator makes maybe a little more money, and the startups, they get visibility and they get money. So I think that is one appeal that, everyone has to work together to make the 5G successful. For sure, then second one is, I think let's promote Make in India. As much as we can, we are excellent on the software development, we are excellent in creating anything, whatever we want to create on the platform by using the softwares. So apply all the AI, ML, develop the software which are really the efficient in terms of using this platform and offering the service to the customers. So these are the two things.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. That's a great way of concluding.
Thanks, everyone.
I think from a panel perspective, we are concluded in terms of the topic, but if there are a couple of questions anyone would like to ask from the audience. Yes, sir, in the blue shirt. Can we have a mic onto, is it possible, please? I'm sorry, I think they don't have a mic available. Why don't you please? Thank you so much. Either Adi, please. Sorry, we generally like to come to the customer, but we are making you come to the panel. Sorry about that. Please.
Good evening to all the panelists. I am Colonel Vineet Madan. I am from the Corps of Signals, Indian Army. I just have two queries, short quick queries. One. Secondly, since it's a commercial network that the operators would be having, if at all this network slicing is possible and feasible to be used independently as a segregated cellular network for the defense, what additional security layer can we incorporate in this to make it a mill-grade security? Two queries.
So, आपने एक question में 5 question तो पूछ लिए हैं. So, thank you so much. It's a brilliant question, and thank you for calling it out as a personal query. But I think almost everyone will be involved in answering this question. So, let me start with Mr. Singh, then Tarun, Werner. More of the defense ecosystem to be on high speed interconnectivity everywhere. But I think it's a fair question that he's asking, especially for the border areas.
I think network slicing is the reality, so we should not have any doubt on that. It works perfectly in terms of segregating the spectrum. Now the defense, is spread all over country. Like every state we have the defense organizations. So I think this could be a very good use case for the defense. And I have no doubt that there will be any issues, and ensuring that the security is given, the way inherently, I said, the encryption built into the 5G, I think that's going to protect the secrecy of the defense organization. But at the same time, I think what we need to ensure is that at the monitoring level, at the operator side, we need to create the separate dedicated entity to monitor that slice, and that slice could be actually given directly to the defense rather than coming to the operator. Operator only barges in as and when there's an issue. So I think there's a feasibility for sure. This can be done. I have no doubt about it.
So, Mr. Singh, just adding on to that, like we typically, I have read something on defense. You have what we call the military grade encryption. So, separate level of encryption will be possible in that slice which is done for defense needs. Is that possible?
Encryption on wireless as per the 3GPP may not be possible, but encryption at the core level, actually, we can still add some more firewalls, and we can still provide the additional security, whatever is required, whether it's for the cyber attacks or it's actually for the leakage of any information, authentication, etc. We can do that.
Sure. Tarun, would you like to add?
Yeah, so I think one is that whether you need an application called a separate use case for defense. There is no need to have a separate use case for defense, because if there is a slicing, there is a slicing. And as Veej explained, that can be done the way as a fully secure network. But at the same time, then you are actually having your separate networks being deployed as a private wireless network kind of solution, which is only for defense. It is as a tender given by defense. So in that case, it is anyway an independent network, which is even more secure, one level up. So you had this kind of discussion for 4G, I know for sure. But of course, if you want to talk about this to be set up separately for you, then anyway it becomes an independent island. So then there is no issue of anyway security, because you are setting up as a special license given to defense forces. So these are the two parts. One, of course, is this one, and second, going to this level.
No, very true, because we, as a use case for 5G, private industrial park implementations was a reality in 5G. In fact, that was one of the first use commercial cases that was developed from an enterprise perspective. But yes, Bona, would you like to add anything to this?
He's got my microphone. It's a multi-layered approach, I think. Well, slicing is going to be your networking capability. You will also need to look at the application, the underlying hardware, the devices that you're going to use around that, and all of that will have to play together. So security has to be built in the technology from the get-go when we start with that. And that's something that we're really pursuing a lot with, the technology that we put into our processes, that we put into the software that enables that as well. It's the combination of that. It's not just secure slicing. No, it's all that will come out of it. So, well.
Device securitization is equally going to be important. Dr. Jitu, would you like to add?
I think I agree with the points made, and you have to look at the entire layer stack, and I think the focus is going to, it could shift away from deploying your own separate network, pan-India, whatever, into making sure that you are able to use the existing infrastructure, but subject to all the things that have already been said. I completely agree with that.
I think from a use case perspective, that I think it's perfectly feasible with network slicing and security at the application layer. One issue I see might be, considering the remote locations of, the nature of the defense, and that could be an issue whether, we'll have, how soon we can have 5G coverage in those areas, and whether it makes, commercial sense for that. But from feasibility, I think it's a very interesting use case.
Fair enough. Thank you, Sandeep. I hope that answers your question. Thank you so much. One last one, but please try and keep it specific. Anyone would like to ask? Otherwise, we'll just close. Okay. Oh, yeah. If you can.
Thank you. Chetan from True Minds. With respect to enterprise 5G, we haven't had any discussion here. What is your thought process? Like, US is running very fast in this particular area, right? Whereas in India, we are still not very sure what's going to happen here. And this could be a very strong driver, especially I feel from an operator side. Are operators thinking of incubating companies who will actually drive this? Because implementation will not be with the enterprise, right? It has to be with, companies which are smaller companies like the operators, right?
Complex questions are not allowed today. But anyways, thank you so much for that. Sir, I think first question, first answer. Are you looking at it?
So I think government is anyway working on the spectrum. So very soon, you will have the policy coming out where anybody can buy the spectrum if they want to. Otherwise, meanwhile, as I said, the operators are at the right place, to offer the services to the enterprises. Now the security solutions, as and when the demand comes beyond the 5G inherent security requirements, operators, anyway, they don't produce any products or the technology. They are always dependent on the vendors. I'm sure you are maybe from vendor side. So we'll be always looking forward to have those security solutions around the 5G, which will enable the confidence of the enterprise customers to ensure that they are fully protected and they have the confidence that this network is actually only meant for them. So we'll be looking forward to have those solutions, and teams are already working. Like everyone has, at least I can speak for Vodafone Idea, I have more than 100 people in the security department. Their job is only to ensure that we have the right security solution and protect the network.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Tarun, how do you see, are you looking at investing in any of these ecosystem, separate startups, etc.?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned about one part which was linked to the use cases being done by these young companies, but let me then touch the other part. When we are going to go for this massive rollout, we have a huge partner system which is involved with us, but still it was more of doing it for CSPs. But when you see in next 3 to 5 years, there's going to be huge deployment happening. The growth will be 2x, 4x, 6x. The base is smaller. So if we talk about, let's say, doing a Spark model, so even if we work with Vodafone Idea and there's a customer like L&T, so it is supposed to be a network being deployed there, then it has to be maintained for a period of 3 to 5 to 7 years. And of course, we would like to have the ecosystem where the players who have a cost situation which is much better can maintain those networks. So these kind of things are going to happen now in next 5 to 7 years, where there are going to be many, many networks being put up. There will be people who will be trained for these small companies, and they are going to manage this network as system integrator. And you are right that in US that system is already very mature for last many, many years. But it is going to be a huge growth starting from a low base. We have to work together that we actually train that ecosystem and they can sustain for a period of next 10 years. And that will become also one more area in India in the next 5 to 7 years. And I'm very confident about it. But yes, we have to work together on this. But the growth is abnormal. This I can say from now till 2040 is going to be almost like 2x, 4x every year. Right? I think this is
Thanks, sir. No, that's fair. I'll just ask Dr. Jeetu. Sanjeev, I'm going to skip because that's an anti-incumbency for the question. But Jeetu, yours, and then Werner, I'll request you because I know Intel has been quite active in making a lot of investments across. Yeah, Jeetu.
So this, what you talked about was absolutely relevant. There's one other aspect that I just want to point out, the difference between the US and India. In India, we are likely to be infrastructure constrained in the deployment of 5G much more so than the US. So I agree with the need to invest in and spread the talent around. I also think that we're going to be infrastructure constrained because we have roughly 1/10 the fiber penetration per capita, which roughly translates to 1/10 the data usage per capita. That's a problem. And if there's something which can help alleviate that, absolutely, that's something also we need to look at. I'll just cut it short for that.
Thanks, Dr. Jeetu. Werner, your last comment on that, please.
There we go. When you say we will definitely continue to collaborate in these, and we collaborate with the operators, we collaborate with our equipment partners, and we do so much together in incubating that and in helping the startup system that it's natural for us to continue to do that. So we don't have any specific program in plan for that.
Allow me to put you on the spot. Anything specifically that you would do in India? Are you looking at that?
I'm sure we are, because we have a huge growth plan for Indra. I know our country manager, and actually we had another panel today. Unfortunately, she felt sick, and Nivruti was supposed to be here. We have big plans for India, and I know that we have regular meetings now, even between the Prime Minister and our CEO twice this year. So yes, we do have plans, but I'm not at the liberty, as you know, a Houstonian visiting, seeing what's going on, I'm not at liberty to disclose any of that, but I can bet you 5G India will run on Intel.
Thank you so much, Werner. With this, I would really like to thank all of the participants here. I mean, I have been enlightened with some of the thoughts, so thank you, gentlemen. It's been really kind of you to invest time, and I would like to hand it back to Madam to close out on this. Please, thank you.
I once again thanks my all panelists for sharing your insightful thoughts. May I please request Mr. Shobit Agarwal to kindly present the mementos to all the panelists. Request you to please present the memento to Mr. Jagbir Singh, Vodafone Idea. Next, Mr. Jitin Balakrishna, STL. Okay.